All right. Hello and good evening, everybody. My name is Brian Taylor, and I'm the educator with the North and South Rivers Watershed Association. Thanks so much for joining us again for another installment of this year's WaterWatch lecture series. Before we begin, I would like to thank our sponsors, Clean Harbors, as well as the Massachusetts Cultural Council of Hanover, Hingham, Marshfield, Rockland, and Scituate. Thanks again for your continued support for our programs. If you are not familiar with the North and South Rivers Watershed Association, we are a local nonprofit based in the South Shore through education, advocacy, and engagement programs. Much like this one tonight, we strive to ensure healthy waters for people and for the environment for now and for the future. So just by you being here tonight is supporting what we're doing and tuning into these educational programs. So we really appreciate your continued support. So this week's program, we're really excited for tonight's program. Before we begin, there is a Q&A tab. If you have any questions, you are welcome to type them into the question and A function at the bottom of this webinar. And if there is time at the end, we will try to get to those questions. If we do not have time at the end, you all have my email and you're welcome to email me any questions, and then I can send those to our presenter tonight to get some responses, but hopefully we'll have a little bit of time tonight. I will say it just got windy, like real windy where I live, and I'm a ways down a dirt road with shaky power lines. So if anything happens, I may disappear, but Kezia, you should be able to continue the lecture without me. So fingers crossed on that.
Yes.
To tonight's program, as it has been for the past several decades, this is a partnership between the North and South Rivers Watershed Association and Mass Audubon. And so we're really excited to have Kim Snyder here, who is Mass Audubon Southeast Educational Coordinator. And so Kim, I do have your slide here that I'll bring up. And so Kim, if you want to say hello and talk a little bit about some upcoming Mass Audubon programs.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brian. So true to form, Mass Audubon has a lot of upcoming bird programs. So we have couple of different birding walks that you can join, including we have a birding by van program that is really useful for folks who may have a little difficulty taking long walks or being on their feet for long periods of time. Excitingly, we've had really regular reports of our short-eared owls out at our Daniel Webster Wildlife Sanctuary. So we've been scheduling some walks out there to get people more acquainted with our short-eared owls. If we have any residents of Plymouth, Massachusetts in the audience tonight, we also are partnering with the town of Plymouth to assist them with their downtown resiliency project. And there's going to be a workshop on that coming up next Saturday on February 8th. So it's a good opportunity to come down and, participate in local government and have your voice heard. We've got a family owl program called S'mores and More going on at our North River Wildlife Sanctuary, also on the 8th in the evening. Great opportunity to get the kids outside after dark and have them learning about owls, and you get a tasty treat as part of that as well. And we're also starting an Art and Nature for Families program series. So I think we're doing that once a month through May right now, and that's also going to be out of our North River Sanctuary. So great opportunity to come and try your hand at a couple different art projects. And with that, I'm going to say thank you once again to Brian and Kezia, and I'm going to pass it back to you, Brian.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. I appreciate it. I'm excited about the birding programs by Van. I know that in communication with Doug to get a couple more birding programs, collaborations going, so we'll be excited. More on that to come. We've had fantastic turnout. I see there's 110 folks tuning in tonight, and there are nearly 400 people who have registered for the overall WaterWatch program, which is actually a record in the past several years. So really appreciate you tuning in. And no pressure to our presenter tonight. I'm really excited to introduce Kezia Bacon for tonight's lecture. Kezia started to volunteer with the North and South Rivers in 1991 and then joined the staff in 94. Back then it was a staff, as she said, of staff of 1.5, a director in herself, and so she was the 0.5. However, she is definitely more than a 0.5. Now she is our community engagement manager. And if you have ever been to our website or searched for any local local open space or conservation lands or parks throughout the South Shore, chances are you have seen or read her work. She has contributed so much to helping folks gain access to the outdoors and have a safe and successful time out there, as well as provide interesting and invaluable information regarding our South Shore, including myself. When I first started, Kezia really helped join up with me, and we provided a lot of walks, and I really got going in and around the watershed thanks to Kezia. So Kezia, thanks so much for joining us tonight. I will hand it on over to you, and away we go.
Thank you, Brian. I'm really excited to share what I've learned about the Indian Head River and its history with you all tonight. I'm also eager to learn more. So if you have history to share with me, I hope you'll reach out. My email address is my first name, Kezia, @nsrwa.org. You'll find that on our website too. So let me get my screen going here. Okay. We are going to talk about the Indian Head River.
Looks great.
Excellent. I love when it works. So just going a little deeper into what the North and South Rivers Watershed Association does. Our overall purpose is protecting our waters. We do that through 3 pillars of our work: education in schools, mostly with Brian, online, and through presentations like this one. We also do a lot of engagement work, outdoor experiences, citizen action, programs like our citizen science, where we're counting fish together, or horseshoe crabs. We work with volunteers to monitor environmental health in the area. And healthy waters is another very important pillar. Obviously, this is staff-led projects such as dam removals to restore river habitat, water conservation demonstration projects, and water quality improvement projects. Lots of good stuff. Our motto is education plus engagement equals healthy waters. The more we educate and engage people, the healthier our waters will be. So I'm guessing that many of you who are tuning in tonight are NSRWA members. Thank you for that. I'm really excited to share this with you. I've been studying the history of our local rivers since I was in college, which was like 35 years ago, and I could probably talk for 3 hours on this topic, but I'm not going to do that. I'll stick to the hour as requested, and hopefully there'll be time for questions at the end. So this is a map of the Indian Head River. Normally, if I could actually hear you contributing, I would ask you to call out places that you can experience the Indian Head River directly, but since I can't actually hear you tonight, I'll just give you a second to think about if you know of public places to access the Indian Head. This map is a good clue. So we have the Hanover Public Launch on Indian Head Drive. We have the Matakeesit Trail, which is right next to that. We have Ludden's Ford in Hanover and in Pembroke, the Tucker Preserve in Pembroke, Rocky Run Conservation Area in Hanson. You can view the Indian Head River from the State Street Bridge between Hanover and Hanson, or Cross Street if you're from Hanover. Chapman's Landing is a conservation property in Hanover that's on the Indian Head and the North River. And then there's this amazing trail that extends all the way up the Hanover side of the Indian Head River on an old railroad bed. That's a fantastic place to explore the Indian Head. Also, you can see the Indian Head from the Winter Street or Broadway Bridge in Hanson as well. So the Indian Head River links Factory Pond to the Atlantic Ocean via the North River. It rises from a series of smaller waterways upstream, fortified by several brooks along its 3.7-mile course, and then it joins with Herring Brook to form the 12-mile North River at a spot on the Hanover-Pembroke line that is commonly known as the Crutch. So from Factory Pond to the State Street, Cross Street Bridge to Rocky Run Brook, the Indian Head River forms the border between Hanover and Hanson, and a stretch of a major tributary, the Drinkwater River, also forms the border between Hanover and Hanson. Here is a map of the Indian Head River with its sub-watershed. So that pink line is the 3.7-mile Indian Head. And everything in yellow is land on which the waters flow to the Indian Head. So it's a really big area. So the Indian Head River watershed extends into 9 different towns. I'll give you a second to think if you know any of them. It's Abington, Hanover, Hanson, Norwell, Pembroke, Rockland, Weymouth, and Whitman. So that's what's known as a watershed, a drainage area. All the waters within this yellow area drain to the same river system. So that's that pink line right there, the Indian Head. Here's the greater North and South Rivers watershed. So the Indian Head River and its watershed is part of the North and South Rivers watershed, which is considerably larger. You can see the Indian Head River kind of in the center here. The North and South Rivers watershed, the area which the rivers and their tributaries drain, includes approximately 73,000 acres or 114 square miles, primarily in the towns of Marshfield, Scituate, Norwell, Pembroke, Hanover, Hanson, Duxbury, and Rockland. And then also to a lesser extent, sections of Whitman, Abington, Weymouth, and Hingham. Other major tributaries to the system include the South River, the first, second, and third Herring Brooks, Herring River, and Scituate. So a lot of herrings in those names. They were not super creative when they were naming these streams, but it shows us how important herring were in the 1600s, that they would name all these streams after herring. We're just going to go through some of the sub-watersheds of the Indian Head. So there are quite a few. One is French's Stream. And this sub-watershed includes all of Rockland, a little bit of Abington between routes 18 and 58, and a tiny little bit of Whitman along the Rockland line. There's a picture of French's Stream flowing through the Rockland Town Forest there. This is a much larger sub-watershed, is the Drinkwater River and its many tributaries. Its tributaries include Cushing Brook, Ben Man Brook, Shingle Mill Brook, Longwater Brook, Torrey Brook, and there's others, some without names. These are mostly in Hanover, but some of the Drinkwater's tributaries are in Hanson, Rockland, and Norwell. This is where French's Stream and the Drinkwater River flow together. This is on a trail that you can access from Forge Pond Park in Hanover. Amazing place. Another sub-watershed is the Indian Head Brook watershed. It begins way out in McQuon Pond and flows through Indian Head Pond and Wampatuck Pond, which is at the Hanson Town Hall, and then into the Indian Head River between Winter Street and State Street. So that picture, the Nathaniel Thomas Mill, is on Indian Head Brook just below Wampatuck Pond, so across the street from the Hanson Town Hall. It dates back to 1694. That's not the building from 1694. It was possibly the first dam in Plymouth Colony to power a water wheel, and it remained in use as a mill until at least 1900. This building was actually erected in 1976 as part of the town's bicentennial celebration. Okay, another tributary is Rocky Run Brook. This forms some of the town line between Hanson and Pembroke. That picture's in Rocky Run Conservation Area in Hanson. There were a couple early mills on this brook. They weren't especially successful. But some cool stuff you can see on Rocky Run. There's this old earthen dam in the woods at Rocky Run Conservation Area that you can go across. Very cool place. Closer to the river, these are the two bottom photos here. There's this enormous whale-shaped boulder. And if you climb up on top of it, you'll find the words Dwelly 1875 engraved in it. So a man named Dwelly once operated an iron forge near this spot. Two more Hanover tributaries to the Indian Head. One is an unnamed brook that used to be called Iron Mine Brook. It drains the area between Center and Spring Streets in Hanover. And the other one is Iron Mine Brook, which used to be called Trout Brook. And that drains the eastern part of Broadway and the area by the transfer station between Route 53 and 139. Here they are up close, the unnamed brook on the left and Iron Mine Brook on the right. And most of Hanson is actually in the Taunton River watershed, but enough of it is in the Indian Head River, North and South Rivers watershed. That's that blue line down the middle, shows the dividing line. Here's an old map of Massachusetts Bay. All of these rivers that we're talking about were formed when the glaciers retreated about 10,000 years ago. Basically, the glaciers melted, channels were formed for the meltwater, and those became today's rivers. Silts deposited by the rivers soon became salt marshes, and as sea level rose, the marshes grew. Both the North and South rivers are tidal to a large extent and include extensive areas of marshland. The Indian Head is not so much affected by tides, mostly because of how far upstream it is, but also because of dams, and we're going to talk more about those later. We do see some tidal influence below Ludden's Ford Dam on the Hanover-Pembroke line. This is an exhibit that's at the Marshfield Airport. Very cool thing to check out. It's like 3 panels, I think. So the North and South Rivers Watershed Association acknowledges that the North and South Rivers and their watershed are located on the ancestral lands of the Massachusetts and Wampanoag tribes, the indigenous peoples who have inhabited the South Shore for thousands of years. We honor with gratitude the land, the waterways, and the people who have stewarded it for generations. There is ample evidence of Native American encampments at various sites along the rivers and their tributaries. Our watershed was inhabited mostly by the Massachusetts tribe, but the Wampanoag also probably came this far north to hunt and fish. Their lifestyles were seasonal, setting up large camps inland in the colder months and smaller camps closer to the shore in the warmer months. Much of the local Native American population was decimated by a plague of smallpox around 1617, but some were still living here in the 1630s when the European settlers from Plymouth came north. Indian Head River is located on the ancestral lands of the Matakeesit band of the Massachusetts people. Their region extended up and down the Indian Head and North Rivers, as well as their tributaries and beyond. They established a village at what's now Pembroke around Furnace, Oldham, and Great Sandy Bottom Ponds. The area is sometimes referred to in history books as the Great Ponds of Matakeesit. Matakeesit means place of many fish. Prior to European colonization, our waterways flowed freely all the way from their headwaters to the ocean. So all the way to these ponds, from these ponds to the ocean. Locally, we had river herring, shad, eels, brook trout, pickerel, perch, striped bass, and even salmon in our rivers in significant numbers. The indigenous inhabitants of our area lived in harmony with the riverine ecosystem for thousands of years, using it for ceremonies, travel, and fishing. And they're still here today. Dr. Larry Fisher of the Matakeesit tribe is an excellent resource for learning more. He actually participated in the WaterWatch lecture series a few years ago, and I believe you can still see a recording of his talk, which was fascinating. I recommend checking him out. Okay. Here's an old postcard of the North River. In many, but not all cases, the first colonial homesteads were established on or near our local rivers. Back then, there were some Native American pathways, but no roads. The ocean and the river served as highways for Native Americans and for colonists. Many of the Native American pathways became our first roads. There was one that extended from Bridgewater to Duxbury that ran alongside Indian Head Pond and connected the ponds in Pembroke and the ponds in Hants. Here we have an old postcard of Third Cliff, which doesn't look like that anymore. Starting in the 1630s, European settlers began arriving in today's Scituate and Marshfield. Hanover and Hanson were part of Scituate and Duxbury at that time. So some of these early settlers included the men of Kent and Scituate, who originally came from Kent, England, and began settling Scituate Harbor and Third Cliff in 1628. Governor Edward Winslow arrived in Marshfield in 1632. Cornet Robert Stetson and his wife Honor Tucker arrived in Norwell before 1640 and settled on what's today's Stetson Meadows on the North River in Norwell. William Barstow settled on the North River in today's Hanover around 1649. He also constructed the first bridge over the North River. Robert and Lucy Barker arrived around 1650 in Herringbrook in Pembroke. James Bishop arrived by 1679. He owned land on the Indian Head River in Hanson and was definitely living there by 1710. So by the mid to late 1600s, there were a significant number of settlements on or near the rivers and their tributaries. Here's an old mill on the Drinkwater River. The swiftness of the water is what led to the establishment of mills on pretty much every tributary to the North, South, and Indian Head rivers. European colonists interacted with the natural world in a different way than Native Americans did. They regarded the rivers mostly as a powerful force to be harnessed for industry. This led to the building of dams, enabling them to employ the power of water to run their mills and factories. And some of these included sawmills, grist mills, cloth and boxboard mills, just to name a few. Unfortunately, in most cases, the dams also blocked the passage of fish. But it didn't actually start out this way. Early mills were required to remove their works during fish migration seasons. But that practice dwindled as industry boomed. Among the earliest mills was the sawmill Cornet Robert Stetson, established between 1656 and 1674 at this spot on the Drinkwater River in West Hanover. So here you got the older photo. Here's what it looks like today from a different vantage point. I climbed down a riverbank to take this picture, and I'm so glad I did, because what a cool view that is. So this is Circuit Street in Hanover, not very far above what's today Forge Pond. The mill burned down during the 1676 King Philip's War raids. Sawmills would have been very important back in those days, producing lumber to build homes. There was a lot of pine, but our forests were much more diverse in the colonial era. These days, there's a lot more pine. Shifting focus, this is probably the location of the first mill on the Indian Head River. Spot is today called Luddonsford. There was a dam, a sawmill, and a grist mill here prior to 1693. So we found out a few years ago that this site was named for James Ludden, Ludden, not Ludham, a local guide who, legend has it, literally carried Governor John Winthrop of the Massachusetts Bay Colony on his back across the river to visit Governor William Bradford of Plymouth Colony. So the stream was very strong, and fording it was a big deal. So Mr. Ludden's name was recorded incorrectly at some point and has been passed forward as Ludham. All the signs are incorrect. I assume they will be updated now that his identity has been corrected. You'll see on Google Maps, you'll see the signs at the property, it still says Ludham's Ford everywhere. But just so you know, I'm not messing up every time I say Ludden. Here's a sign that's on that bridge I just showed you. The first bridge over the Indian Head River was built at this spot between 1704 and 1730. This historic marker lists some of the industries that were established on either side of the river. One of the early ones was the Curtis Anchor Forge. So bog iron was an important natural resource of the region back then. As early as 1704, Thomas Barton's ironworks was erected at Luddonsford, transforming bog iron into iron utensils. So they would rake this iron ore up from the bottom of swamps and ponds and wetlands and then process it. Later names associated with the spot were Wanton, Randall, Barstow, and Jocelyn. Joseph Jocelyn held a major portion of this ironworks for much of the 1700s. It's recorded in the history books that he had trouble with the town because the dam that he had at his forge prevented herring from ascending the river to their spawning grounds. I love that that was in the history book. I should note also that Jocelyn was a slaveholder. Maybe 10% of Hanover's households included enslaved people, generally as domestic servants, although elsewhere in our watershed, they were also employed in the shipbuilding industry. We don't know specifically about in mills and forges. The Curtis family took over this mill in 1791. So this image of the Curtis Anchor Forge, which is from Briggs's History of Shipbuilding on the North River, this forge produced up to 250 tons of anchors per year and these ranged from 1,000 to 10,000 pounds. That's a pretty big anchor. Many of them were made for the government during the American Revolution. Some of the anchors of the USS Constitution were forged in Hanover, either here or at the Barstow Iron Works, which was a little farther upstream. There's some disputing evidence on that, which one it was. They both lay claim, and maybe both of them did it. This is the E.H. Clapp Rubber Works. In 1873, the E.H. Clapp Rubber Works was established on the site of the Curtis Anchor Works. It was basically a rubber reclamation plant. Despite at least 2 major fires that required rebuilds, it ended up growing very large. You can see it here, but this is nothing like what you're going to see in a second. In its time, it was the largest of its kind in the world, employing 100 people. In 1886, it was expanded to both sides of the river, covering 18 acres. There were 35 buildings in the factory area when it went into receivership during the Depression. When we look back at all these successful mills and factories, it's important to know that they thrived in part because of all the domestic labor being done at home by women and children, and sometimes also enslaved people. So here's an aerial of that area to just give you an idea of the sprawl of the factory. According to Hanover historian Barbara Barker, the waste from this factory was dumped into the riverside swamps and still remains today, somewhat overgrown as an early trampoline and early polluter. It wasn't unusual for industries to use the river essentially as a way to carry waste away. According to Briggs' History of Shipbuilding on North River, this was written in 1889, the dams prevent their ascending to their old spawning grounds, and the refuse of the mills, especially the rubber mill, so impregnates the waters and fills up the smaller streams that they cannot and will not go up. And without some decided steps are soon taken, all fish will become as much strangers to the river as the bass and salmon have already. This aerial photo is looking south from Hanover to Pembroke. You can see at the very bottom, there's some train tracks. And this is the most recent iteration of the Leddensford Dam. It was built in 1906 and it still stands despite being obsolete since 1934. That long bit in the middle is the fish ladder. Most of our local dams no longer serve a purpose. Since it no longer serves a purpose, and since it's not going to be used again for industrial purposes, we're hoping to remove this dam in the future to open up the Indian Head River to fish passage once again. Dam removals help to restore the natural flow of rivers and streams, and they make communities more resilient to climate change. They also restore wildlife habitat, enhance fish passage and migration range, and improve water quality while eliminating liability for dam owners. This is what Leddensford Park looks like today on the Pembroke side. So just used to look like this, and this, and now this. The town of Hanover purchased its side of Leddensford property in the 1930s. I'm not certain when the town of Pembroke purchased its side. The fish ladder was constructed by the state around 1952. It's functional, but it's difficult to access, and it's not clear how many fish make it up and over the ladder. Lunsford Park became conservation land in 1962 and 63 and was cleaned up considerably. You can still see vestiges of the factory era there. If you look closely, there's some weird like metal hooks in the ground. There's some bouncy parts in the woods. There's some old foundations, lots of those, some covered with graffiti. It's a very cool place to explore. The area looks very different now. So while we're talking about Lunsford and the 1960s, I'd like to tell you more about what was happening on the South Shore relating to our rivers at that time. There was already a wastewater treatment plant in Abington that discharged to a tributary to the Indian Head River. There were proposals to build a new wastewater treatment plant in Scituate as well as in Rockland, both of which would discharge to the rivers. And now what's remembered as the Battle for the North River, longtime nature educator and professor, Captain William Vinell, or Captain Bill Vinell of Norwell, along with the Isaac Walton League, whose pamphlet is shown here, succeeded in spreading awareness around these issues. Fortunately, two Wetlands Protection Acts, the Jones Act and the Hatch Act, were passed in Massachusetts in 1963 and 65. The treatment plants were still built, but now there were severe limits on what they could discharge. This is the mouth of the North River, with the South River coming up at the bottom of the picture. Since the 1970s, perspectives on the environment have shifted, and culturally, we are increasingly appreciating rivers and marshes for flood protection, for wildlife habitat, and beauty, and not as sewers. The NSRWA was founded in 1970, thanks in large part to Bill Vinell's advocacy, but also because of Jean Foley. She observed that bird populations at Driftway Conservation Park in Scituate, which is kind of on the upper left part of this photo here, the populations were changing, and she wondered if it was due to construction nearby of a treatment plant and of condominiums. After getting no response when she contacted the town, she took matters into her own hands and began gathering local people concerned about the changing local environment to discuss what actions they could take to better preserve it. And thus, our Watershed Association was born. In 1972, the Clean Water Act went into effect. This was a national act to restore and maintain the integrity of water, improve wastewater treatment, and protect wetlands. And this act prompted the closure of a colonial meatpacking plant on a tributary to the North River in Rockland, and also the wastewater treatment plant on a tributary in Abington. So both of those are tributaries to the Indian Head as well. We also got the North and South Rivers designated as a national natural landmark by the U.S. Department of the Interior, those are the national parks people, in 1975, and got the North River designated the state's first scenic and protected river by the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Management, and that was in 1979. This plaque about the national natural landmark is at South River Park in Marshfield, and we didn't get the plaque until quite a bit later. Can't quite read what it says, but at least a couple decades after the fact. We'll talk more about NSRWA's work on the Indian Head River later on tonight, but let's get back to the 18th century. So here, upstream from Lunsford, the next significant spot on the Indian Head was a mill privilege we know today as the Waterman Tack Factory. Beginning in the 1700s, it was home to a number of industries. The earliest was probably a carding mill where wool fibers were prepared for spinning. Also, James Torrey's fulling mill, where wool fiber was cleaned and thickened, and then later a grist mill. The R.C. Waterman Tack Factory thrived at this spot, harnessing the power of the river to mechanize the production of tacks, or nails. Waterman tacks were used primarily in shoemaking and repair, but also in the furniture and upholstery trades, for equestrian equipment, and for laying carpet. This was an exceptionally fine line of tacks. Historians indicate that many shoe repair shops, even in New York and Philadelphia, would only use Waterman tacks. The business continued to expand and thrive, and by 1875, it employed 25 people and produced 250 tons of tacks per year. Here you can see the building from the front on the left and from the back, from the riverside on the right. So at some point between 1830 and 1870, the dam at the spot was raised 4 or 5 feet. I'm not sure you can see my cursor, but the dam would have been as tall as the section of the mill that I'm guessing you can't see my cursor, but halfway up. Remnants are still visible on both sides of the river, remnants of the dam. It's listed in a 1915 report as being 10 feet in height. Because of the dam, the river upstream of this spot was more like a pond, or what we call an impoundment. It was known as Project Dale. So here's a postcard of Project Dale. This is what it looked like when the dam was still in place at Waterman Tack Factory. We think the name project referred to all the industries in the area, and Dale referred to the peaceful valley it was situated in. In February of 1886, an unusually heavy rain severely damaged not only the tack factory, but the adjacent train tracks, which you can see in this picture at the bottom. It also took out mills farther upstream. Subsequent storms in 1938 and 1954 did permanent damage to industries throughout the river valley and basically destroyed this dam. So this is Project Dale today from river level. Spot is very different now. It's so quiet and so natural. It's hard to imagine it was ever any other way. Definitely a spot to check out if you go to the Tucker Preserve, which is a Wildlands Trust property in Pembroke. You can explore by trail and walk right alongside the river here. This is another old dam on the Indian Head. This is upstream of Rocky Run, but below State Street. And you can't always see this, but if you look closely, you can see the remains of the dam. Jesse Reed operated a grist mill, a nail factory, and a machine shop here, but the facilities were later moved down to the Waterman site. I'm assuming that many of you know about the Hanover Branch Railroad, but some may not. It ran alongside the Indian Head River. It was established in 1868, and it connected to a major north-south railroad route in Abington, extended across Rockland, and had stations in West Hanover, South Hanover, and Hanover Four Corners, with 10 passenger trains per day, plus freight trains. So it's pretty busy. Here's another shot of that train. E.Y. Perry, who had interest in many of the businesses along the river, established the railroad line specifically to transport materials and finished products to and from his factories, along with passengers. Curiously, during World War I, there was talk of extending this line down the North River Valley to Greenbush to connect with the shoreline. Fortunately, the rapid growth of the automobile canceled that plan. Most of the railroad extension tracks were removed in 1969, but some were still visible in West Hanover in the late 2010s. I stumbled across them one day on my way to the Rockland Rail Trail. There's samples of the tracks at the Hanover Branch Rail Trail and in the middle of the Rockland Rail Trail that you can still check out. They've preserved little sections. This is what the old railroad line looks like today. It's a walking trail all along the Indian Head River. So this is a little bit upstream of Project Dale, but it still shows you how much different the water level is. Back in the Project Dale photo, it was quite a bit higher, and you can see it's pretty low here. Cool place to walk. I highly recommend checking this place out. All these places we're mentioning you can access on our website in the Get Outdoors section, which I'll show you at the end. It's a great way to learn about our local properties and where to park and how long the trails are and whether or not you can bring your dog, stuff like that. Earlier, I mentioned Barstow's Forge, another iron forge. It was established near today's State Street and Cross Street Bridge on the Hanover-Hanson line. It produced cannonballs during the American Revolution. It also made ship components for the shipbuilding industry downstream on the North River. The Barstow family were slaveholders as well, likely domestic servants. Subsequent owners of this mill privilege were Robert Salmond and Thomas Hobart, who in 1825 had a contract with the US Navy to manufacture ink. The forge produced 100 tons of bar iron per year and 100 tons of anchors, and also ran 12 to 14 tack machines. And in 1830, it began manufacturing locomotive cranks, possibly the originators of this industry. All this required yet another dam, what we now refer to as the State Street Dam. So you can understand how the Indian Head River became very fragmented and not at all welcoming to fish with all these dams. In 1853, Ezra Phillips, E.Y. Perry, and Martin Stetson formed a partnership to carry on the tack business at the same spot. It was very successful. Their complex included more than a dozen buildings and 2 furnace stacks. You can see one of them in this picture. And that was sold to Atlas Tack Factory during World War I. Today, the area looks a little different. It says Edward Y. Perry Square, so the man that established the train has a square named after him. The buildings are pretty much gone now, except for 1 or 2. Mayette's store, the red building at the center of this photo, was once part of the factory complex. There's also a shed that's not in this frame, that's closer to the river, that was likely part of that. This is the impoundment just above the State Street Dam. Dams not only impede the passage of fish that, in order to complete their life cycle, migrate in and out of rivers like the Indian Head, dams also create a thermal barrier to fish passage. So when a river is impounded upstream of a dam, it creates a large, shallow, warm pool with low oxygen levels, like this one. That's not necessarily hospitable to fish. You can see on this map how just above the Luddingsford Dam, the natural width of the river widens dramatically. That's specifically because there's a dam stopping it there. Because of impoundments on the Indian Head, sometimes the temperature gets up to 86 degrees Fahrenheit, the water temperature. It's a problem for our native fish species. They require cool, oxygen-rich water. Brook trout, for example, do best in waters that average roughly 54 to 66 degrees Fahrenheit, and they can't tolerate extended time in waters above 68. The impoundment and the warming of the Indian Head River means that our native brook trout are currently restricted to a few small inland cold water refuges and can no longer make their way through the warm waters of the Indian Head River to the ocean and back. We'd love to see that change. And we're trying to rectify the situation. Here is in 2016, the site of a project we did with the town of Hanover, Trout Unlimited, and the Massachusetts Division of Fisheries and Wildlife to improve stream flow on Iron Mine Brook. This is a 3+ mile long stream, a tributary to the Indian Head that flows through Hanover and into the Indian Head River at Chapman's Landing next to the Hanover Public Launch. A culvert on the stream was creating a significant obstacle for the fish trying to swim upstream. So you can see on the photo on the right, there's a big difference between the water level of the river and the culvert. So not so good for fish trying to swim upstream. It was also artificially warming the water, making it inhospitable for native fish such as eastern brook trout. So we worked together to remove the culvert. After determining that removing it would yield great benefits to wildlife at a very low cost, we worked with a professional wetland scientist and surveyor, and we made it happen. So that was just after the restoration project, and this is what it looked like back in December of last year. So it's really been restored and is much more hospitable to trout. Believe it or not, for a river that's only 3.7 miles long, there are still more factories to discuss. Factory Pond is a half-mile upstream of the Ezra Phillips Tack Works. Drinkwater River flows into the pond from the west, and the Indian Head River flows out of it to the east. Like nearly all of our local ponds, it was created by the construction of a dam. So here's a Teague's Bridge, a historic photo. This is just downstream of Factory Pond, and it connects Hanson's Winter Street and Hanover's Broadway. It was built before 1740. Just above the bridge is a dam that was built around 1716 for a sawmill, with James Hatch probably taking controlling interest. It was used as a grist mill as well, and in 1814 it was converted to a cotton factory, and then later another sawmill. Here's Teague's Bridge today. Factory Pond, which you can see in the bottom part of this image with the yellow arrow, it's quite large. And there's a lot of history clustered in the stretch of river between it and Forge Pond. That pink arrow points to Forge Pond. So Forge Pond today, there's lots of ways to explore it at Forge Pond Park in Hanover. There's 4 miles of trails, and you can paddle on the pond itself. This spot at King Street in Hanover was home to a lot of industry through the years. The dam was probably erected around 1710 when a company known as the McGill Works was established. In the same general vicinity, the Drinkwater Iron Works was run by Robert and Caleb Barker in the 1750s. They cast and sold bells for meeting houses, along with stoves, hollowware, and machinery of different kinds. This is another spot that produced cannon during the American Revolution. Wow. Same spot today from a very different vantage point. In the early 1800s, a new forge was established here, also a grist mill, sawmill, a boxboard mill, and a shingle mill, all owned by the same company. In the late 1800s, Charles Stetson had a machine shop here, producing rubber hose covering and electric light wires. And then George J.J. Clark became the factory owner in 1899, and he established the National Fireworks in 1907. This was eventually expanded to 200 fenced-in acres, plus 100 additional acres that were used for an airport and for additional storage. So this is King Street building. Part of the building's still there, I believe. Looks a little different these days. This company also built 17 duplex homes within walking distance of the factory, and it had branch offices from Maine to Texas. So this little company in Hanover was not so little. Most of the land was located between King and Winter Streets and between Forge and Factory Ponds. Clark used buildings that already existed on site and built many smaller buildings, and he manufactured and stored fireworks and later munitions. Here's some of the fireworks products. Clark developed a process of making aluminum powder to be used in firecrackers. Then during World War I, he was asked by Washington to solve a problem with tracer bullets. Between the wars, he went back to making fireworks again. There were factory jobs, but also there was piecework that women and children could do at home, things like packing sparklers and rolling and packing caps for cap guns. Fireworks being incendiary, there were several fires and rebuilds to the factory. According to Barbara Barker, no one was killed or seriously injured, but it was definitely anxiety producing with all that flammable stuff around. So you can see the larger building in the foreground of this picture and a lot of smaller buildings in the background. During World War II, the National Fireworks became one of the largest munition factories in the country. Munitions production at the fireworks sometimes caused water shortages and water pollution. The government's Defense Plant Corporation actually gave the town of Hanover a new 1 million gallon per day well and pumping station in 1943. I love this picture. It's just a little creepy and cool at the same time. Over the course of the next 60 years, the site was used for research, development, manufacturing, and testing of munitions and pyrotechnics for the US government, as well as commercial manufacturing of civilian fireworks and other non-munitions related manufacturing. And this is what it looks like today. So Forge Industrial Park is located on the National Fireworks site. In the mid-1980s, contamination was discovered on site, showing up varyingly in sediment, soil, groundwater, and fish tissue. According to the EPA, this includes mercury, lead, organic solvents, propellants, and explosives that were used in the various manufacturing operations. Actual munitions and explosives have been found in the soil at Factory Pond. So the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection, the DEP, has spent the last 30 years working with the towns of Hanover and Hanson and the responsible parties to clean this place up. As of November 2023, 35,611 pounds or 192,000 pieces of munitions had been removed from the site. This is on Factory Pond. Much of the land around Factory Pond is conservation land now, but it's closed to the public due to contamination and due to unexploded ordnance. You wouldn't want to trip across that. In 2023, after cleanup funding had been depleted, the DEP asked the EPA to list the fireworks site on the national priorities list for Superfund designation. If the site is designated Superfund, that means there'll be a site assessment, a cleanup plan, funding for that cleanup, and the muscle of the federal government. They're currently working on the expanded site inspection. The select boards of all three towns directly affected, Hanover, Hanson, and Pembroke, have voted to support this designation. So now we're in a holding period while we wait for the wheels of government to turn. Superfund designations only happen twice a year. So what comes next is the development of a hazard rating system by the EPA, which should be released for comments in August of 2025. That document, in conjunction with the towns and governor's support, will hopefully culminate in an official listing for Superfund by the end of 2025. Anytime there's a development or an action that can be taken by the general public, we'll share this information. We always do. But if you have specific questions about the project, you can email our Indian Head River project manager, Becky Malamut. Her email address is on our website as well, becky@nsrwa.org. We don't know how long the actual cleanup will last based on what they discover in their investigations. So Factory Pond is closed. You can't paddle on it. You can't fish on it. We look forward to the day when access will be restored, as it's actually a lovely place. You can fish elsewhere on the Indian Head, but it needs to be catch and release. No fish from the Indian Head should be consumed due to mercury contamination. Coming back to Luddens Ford, here's the dam on the main channel of the Indian Head, that impoundment that warms the water there on the left. Contaminated sediment has been identified at both the State Street and Luddens Ford dams. Part of the Superfund assessment is determining its scope, including how much of the Indian Head River will be included in the Superfund cleanup. They'll look into how much of this is just typical industrial contamination and how much is specifically from the national fireworks. Once that's determined, we'll know what our next steps could be as we look toward removing these obsolete dams. Either way, there's funding, whether from Superfund or from the National Resource Damages Fund and other grants. This is the State Street Dam again. Remember how I talked about big storms in 1938 and 1954 destroying the dams in the Project Dale area? So the Luddens Ford Dam and the State Street Dam have been identified as being in poor condition and in danger of breaching. This one actually at State Street has already breached partially in a few places. As the storms continue to intensify, we're increasingly concerned about these dams failing. A sudden and uncontrolled release of water, which would cause flooding downstream to residents and businesses, not to mention it would release all that contaminated sediment. So if the three communities all agree to move forward, we're hoping to get the sediment and dams removed safely and then return the river to its free-flowing state. That would be amazing. Here's a quieter scene on the Indian Head. This is at Chapman's Landing. After nearly 300 years of industrial use, the Indian Head River has been enjoying a much quieter phase. The NSRWA is working with the communities of Hanover, Hanson, and Pembroke, along with the Wildlands Trust and various state and nonprofit agencies such as Trout Unlimited, to restore the health of the river and make it more accessible to humans and to wildlife. The Indian Head River Trail Coalition has been establishing and improving a trail system and fostering the preservation of open space. There are some lovely trails along the Indian Head. This particular bench is this overlook near Ludden's Ford. You wouldn't necessarily know to take a side trail, but when you're walking on the Indian Head River trails, I recommend exploring all the side trails because they lead to beautiful spots like this. This overlooks the river. So there's a loop that extends from Ludden's Ford in Hanover all the way up the Indian Head River Trail to State Street in Hanover, Hanson, then back down the other side through the Rocky Run Conservation Area in Hanson and the Tucker Preserve in Pembroke, back to Ludden's Ford in Pembroke. It's like 4 miles. It's a fantastic walk if you're up for it. So beautiful. Instead of a fragmented river with toxic sediment and fish that are unsafe to eat, we envision a connected ecosystem with healthy waters, thriving fisheries. We hope to restore the natural flow of streams, reconnect wildlife habitats, enhance fish passage, eliminate liability for dam owners, and strengthen our watershed's resilience to climate change. We've already completed 3 successful dam removals, all on Third Herring Brook in Hanover and Norwell. Those were in 2014, 2016, and 2020. The river herring, alewife, and brook trout populations are already rebounding. And beginning last fall, after a very long planning process, a dam removal has been underway on the South River in Marshfield at Veterans Memorial Park. We took a staff field trip there on Monday to watch the actual jackhammer take the concrete part of the dam apart. It was so amazing after all the work we've done. When we look at our relationship to the land and the water over time, we can see patterns and we can work toward changing them. Tonight, I've only covered a fraction of NSRWA's achievements over the last 50 plus years to protect and restore our local rivers. Things like bringing shell fishing back to the North and South rivers by collaborating with various parties to improve water quality. We've identified numerous challenges and we're actively working to address them. We hope that the more you know about local waterways, the more you'll want to protect them. I just want to point out to you before I change slides, down that bottom photo, that's Dan Jones, who was the executive director of the NSRWA when I signed on in the early 90s. He's still a member, still active. As I mentioned before, the Get Outdoors section of our website is something I want you to know about. Getting out there and experiencing our rivers and our trails is a great way to learn more about our local environment. So we make it easy for you at Get Outdoors. All the info you'll need is right on our website. So say you want to go for a walk, but you don't know where to go, you can click on the hiking box and Get Outdoors, and you'll get listings for all sorts of public properties all over the South Shore where you can take a hike. I think there's like 200 of them. You can narrow the search by town, which I recommend. On those listings, we provide trail maps and parking info, as well as all sorts of other cool stuff like the property's history, what watershed it's in, whether or not you can bring your dog. To date, we have over 500 listings in Get Outdoors, and we're still adding more. It's not just hiking, paddling, fishing, boating, beaches, cross-country skiing, playgrounds, picnic tables, and plenty more. What can you do for your rivers? So in addition to attending talks like this, a great way to get to know your local waterways to get involved, perhaps by volunteering. We love that. We have volunteer opportunities to fit pretty much every skill set, and we'd love for you to join us. One fun volunteer opportunity that we have right now is that we encourage you to go visit our Let Our Rivers Flow mural, which is at Hanover Crossing, the old Hanover Mall, and take a selfie. So take a picture of yourself with the mural in the background. There's lots to see in the mural, lots of cool little animals and plants. And if you share that selfie with us, we'll share it widely, and you'll be helping us to promote Let Our Rivers Flow and the NSRWA. If you sign up for our e-news, which you can do on our website and probably in the email you got welcoming you to tonight's program, you're going to get twice monthly emails where you can learn all about current issues, events, history, volunteer opportunities, and plenty more. You can read my blogs. You can also become a member, which of course directly supports our work. Our goal is healthy waters. I'm going to hand it back to Brian, see if there's some questions to be answered.
Fantastic talk, Kezia. just very, very informative. So much that I didn't know about the Indian Head River, even after paddling on it so many times. If anyone does have any questions, there were some that came in that I have sort of fielded already. But if anyone has any, feel free to type them in right now in the Q&A tab. And so we'll allow a little bit for that to happen. I will say that, and you mentioned this, Kezia, I'm really glad that you did. A couple years ago, we did have Dr. Larry Fisher join us for a fantastic talk. It was in 2023, and it was entitled Know Thy Neighbor, a brief look at the history, culture, and teachings of the Matakeesit people. That recording is on our website on this WaterWatch lecture page. If you go down to past lectures, you'll see that there. And Dr. Larry Fisher, the chief of the Matakeesit tribe, it did a fantastic talk that goes into a lot of the early Native American history at that time now and prior to the European settlement. So that is a fantastic recording to watch in regards to that history. And so I know that there was a couple questions about Ludden as opposed to Ludum, and Kezia, you obviously answered that right there as well. And so let me see if there's any questions that have come in. I have had some questions regarding the name of the Indian Head River, and I know that Dr. Fisher did mention some about that in the previous recording, which I would rather not go into. I'd rather folks tune into that and hear what he had to say about that. And so, but I don't know, Kezia, if you have any information that you would like to share with us in regards to that today.
Obviously, the name makes us uncomfortable, but we feel that we need to refer to, especially to the Matakeesit tribe's perspective on this. I mean, there was some talk around the last lecture about, well, we should change the name, and we would certainly support that if the tribe did. But I believe Dr. Fisher mentioned that he felt it was important to that the history be remembered. And so again, like Brian said, I strongly recommend that you check out Dr. Fisher's talk. You'll learn a lot more that I didn't cover because it's his tribe story to tell.
Absolutely. And I have met Dr. Fisher numerous times. If there is anyone who has questions in regards to his talk from a few years ago, please feel free to email those to me and I can get in communication with him. He's a fantastic resource in the community.
Absolutely.
Let's see if there's any more. There's been a couple compliments that have come in through the Q&A tab about your presentation. I will take this opportunity to shout out next week's program. A few of the questions that I've already fielded were in regards to brook trout. And so on February 5th, next week, the blue line method, how to catch and release a wild trout. Vincent Batista, epidemiologist, conservationist, and interim president of South Shore Flycasters, will teach us all about brook trout, a cherished native game fish that has responded brilliantly to local conservation efforts. In southern New England, there is a long tradition of targeting wild brookies in small creeks and streams where conventional angling methods are neither efficient or particularly sustainable. For example, live bait. So this talk will review methods for safely targeting, catching, and releasing wild brook trout in our local hidden gem streams. And I assume he's going to maybe give away some of his secret spots.
Ooh, reason to tune in right there.
I mean, we'll see. So that will be next week's program. And so I'm looking at the Q&A tab, and it's all praise to you, Kezia, for the program tonight. So
I love when NSRWA gives me an opportunity to talk history. It's so fun to study this stuff and to see how it connects with the current situation, to see how changing attitudes about the environment have changed, sometimes back and forth through the years. These are fascinating subjects, and there's a lot for us to learn.
Absolutely. And if if anyone is curious about visiting the Indian Head River, obviously Ludden's Ford and many of the other locations that Kezia has shared, a great little hidden spot to access the river for wading in or kayaking or canoeing is there across the street from Ludden's Ford down Indian Head Lane in Hanover. There's a cul-de-sac at the end there, and it doesn't really look like much when you get there. It's sort of a gravel turnaround, but there is a spot, a fantastic spot, in my opinion, one of the best places to access the North River through the Indian Head there, and you paddle through just beautiful freshwater tidal marshes, which there's only a handful of those in the state. It's a real precious zone there, very unique habitat. So, but I'm sure we'll talk plenty more about that. But if you do go onto our website, you'll see what Kezia has written about those locations there. Lots of information, especially to help you get out there and have a successful paddling adventure on the
Mhm.
So more thank yous. Kezia coming. I don't know if you're seeing the Q&A, but it's all
No, I don't see it.
there's no
I see
cres-
occasionally I see a little thumbs up float up from
yeah.
the bottom, but that's all I can see.
Yeah.
Nice.
Just a couple more minutes if there's any other questions that come in. It seems like you answered pretty much everything that folks had on their mind, Kezia. And so
Oh,
but
Brian, let me tell people about one more thing. This, for those of you who are into history, and I presume a lot of you are if you're here tonight, this Sunday, one of our volunteers, Jim Glinsky from Scituate, is going to be giving a talk at the Duxbury Free Library at 2 o'clock on the history of the North River. So you could go learn more about history. That's an in-person event. There's no registration. You just show up. They have a nice big room there. So you can check that out.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Let's see. So we do have a couple questions. How active is the current fish ladder at Ludden's Ford?
So it's, if you noticed from the photo I showed, the fish ladder is in the middle of the stream, of a very active stream, and not easy to get to. So while we do a lot of fish counting, it's not an easy place to count fish. So we do know that some fish get over it, but we don't know the numbers on that. It's not reasonable for us to ask our volunteers to climb out there and count fish.
Yeah, it's very difficult to get to. I've heard my favorite reference to fish ladders is "it's a nice try," sort of.
I mean, I hope fish are getting up and over it,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but I hear that they are.
me too. What kinds of things are standing in the way of taking down the remaining dams? This is a loaded question.
Well, there's a lot of things that go into a dam removal. And specifically on the Indian Head River, we have the Superfund cleanup that we're waiting on the status of. If the dams on the Indian Head River are included within that Superfund site, there's going to be a lot of funding around that for dam removal. If they're not, as I said before, there's still funding, there's still study, but it's something that takes a while to sort out. When a dam removal occurs, it can take years and years to get all of the permitting and planning in place. For example, the South River Dam removal that's happening right now took 10 years to plan. They have to test the sediment. They have to, remove contaminated sediment. There's all sorts of things that go into that. We should do a WaterWatch series on a lecture on that sometime. All the things that go into a dam removal and what should be looked at before it comes out. It's not a simple process, that's for sure.
No, years and years, and then going there and seeing it come down in an hour.
That was amazing and crazy. I should mention while we're talking about that if you weren't like us and you didn't get to go see it on a field trip on Monday, we did post a video to social media last night, so you can see that on our channels. The time lapse that Alex Mansfield, one of our staffers, composed, and it's pretty, especially if you like that stuff, like heavy equipment, it's pretty fun to watch. It's just a minute long.
And I'm sure there's going to be more media coming. I know Yari Walensky.
Every week.
Yeah, more media about that coming out. So stay tuned. Yeah. If there's any more questions coming in, real quick, a big thank you to our sponsors, Clean Harbors and the Massachusetts Cultural Councils of Hanover, Hingham, Marshfield, Rockland, and Scituate. Thanks so much for your continued support of our educational programs. Kezia, who heads up the dam removal projects?
Who heads up the dam removal projects? Do you know?
Well, it obviously the local communities as well as landowners, the watersheds. They could be towns, it could be land trusts who the owners, as well
It's
as
usually a pretty big coalition. State,
engine and yeah,
local authorities,
yeah.
towns have to sign on. There's definitely groups like us involved, but it's a coalition for
Mm-hmm.
sure.
Yeah, yeah. Engineers, consultants, it's a big group event.
Usually there's room for public comments and public participation in these things as well.
Mhm, mhm. Are there any other proposed dam removals on the North and South rivers and tributaries?
Oh yeah. So on the South River, we meaning another big coalition, are studying two additional dam removals. So the Veterans Memorial Park Dam, which is the one that's the most downstream on the South River in Marshfield, that's the one that's currently coming out. Upstream of that at Chandler's Pond, which is on the Marshfield Duxbury line, they're studying another dam removal, working with the landowners. And then farther upstream in Duxbury, off of Temple Street on the South River, they're working on a dam removal. Um, so there's a lot more exciting stuff coming up on the South River. I believe those are the only ones that have been seriously studied at this time.
Mhm. Someone says, how about a group field trip to the fish ladder in May?
You bet.
Yeah, and that's a tough, that the fish ladder at Ludden's is just right smack dab in the middle, but you have better luck standing on the shores of either Hanover or Pembroke at Ludden's and look directly in, kind of near the bridge. Sometimes the bridge can kind of cast a shadow, which may help to kind of look in there when it's on the shallower side. And going during the fish run in springtime.
If you want to, this is another really inspiring thing to check out. If you go to our active herring runs during migration season, and we usually post about that on social media as well. So late March, April, early May, especially the Pembroke herring run
Mhm.
on Barker Street, you can see fish swimming upstream in numbers that you won't believe. It's crazy how many fish you'll see. And this is one of the most inspiring things in nature I've ever seen. Seeing these little fish defiantly swimming upstream against all odds to get to their spawning grounds. If you've never witnessed it, I strongly recommend checking that out. They're a lot easier to see at the Pembroke herring run than they are at Ludden's Ford, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, go there anytime, any given day in the spring, and there's a really good chance that you'll see them. And then Jackson Square up in Weymouth is also a pretty good one too. It's not as naturey, but you can see all the hard work that has gone into preserving that run. And I've seen them there in pretty good numbers too.
That's called Herring Run Pool Park if you're looking on Get Outdoors.
Mm-hmm. Spring just around the corner.
We'll get there.
Yeah. Well, it looks like the questions have slowed down. And so thanks again to our sponsors. Kezia, your talk was fantastic. Again, the lecture that was given a couple years ago by Dr. Larry Fisher of the Matakisa tribe goes into Matakisa's culture. Fantastic lecture there. But Kezia, tonight it was a great talk. I learned something new every time.
Hooray. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
That's great. And thanks, Kim and Mass Auto for joining us. This is just another great partnership between two fantastic organizations. So thanks for being here tonight.
All right. We'll see you on the rivers, folks.
Awesome. Thanks a lot. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. We'll see you next week for fly fishing. Have a good night.